to handle this. Elon Musk, man, never run a social media platform. Within the first week, fires half the staff in a week to save money. No private company has 50% of its staff doing nothing. They're now apparently having to call back those people to bring them back in, because obviously, even if that seems weird to me that thousands of people work at Twitter, they were clearly doing something. These aren't business decisions. It's an egomaniac who had his feelings hurt by the people at Twitter. And he's like, I'll get back at them. I'll fire them. I'll take over. Putting $12 billion worth of debt on Twitter's books and be like, man, we really need the money now. I know I said I didn't care about the money when I was buying Twitter, but I really care about it now. Please give me $8, everyone. I need your $8 more than you do. Please have $8 for speech. Insane. And people applaud this shit. Madness. To be clear, Elon Musk has spent most of his time alive talking bullshit, saying he will do things that he never does, spitballing ideas, and then when people explain to him that they're dumb, he goes, oh, I was joking the entire time, ha 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 ha. So he might not do any of this. In the same way that like a discussion of the price of Twitter Blue was done on Twitter with another Twitter user, he was like, oh, yeah, I guess $20 is a little bit much. How about $8? Would that make you like me more? Holy shit, dude. I've never seen a person more desperate to be accepted and liked than Elon Musk, and how cringe he is. Imagine believing that you can make yourself a profitable social media while actively working to piss off as many different people as possible. If Twitter is going to be profitable, Elon needs to realize that advertisers don't like controversial things and that the people he doesn't like or agree with have money that he needs. This is why sane CEOs don't tweet who to vote for. Believing that you can create a public square for everyone to be free to discuss their ideas while being one of the most polarizing, controversial figures on the fucking planet. Any smart person who had that status when they bought a social media would be like, okay, Frank, no one cares about you. You are the most neutral motherfucker alive that no one has opinion on. Run the fucking company as unbiasedly as possible. Because right now, for a lot of people, not me, if it was going well, if it was making good decisions, I'd be fine with it. But a lot of people, support of Twitter is now support of Elon Musk himself. Buying Twitter Blue is now not buying it for its service, it's whether or not you like Elon Musk. The success of Twitter is now, in part, dependent upon how much people like Elon Musk as a person. That is a brain-dead decision. Elon has bought Twitter. That was a dumb business move. And every move that he's made since buying it has not been driven by a desire of good business sense to make the company actually profitable. Or if it has been, if he really believes the decisions he's been making, the whining he's been doing on Twitter is truly his best move for the company, then he is even dumber than I think he is. To be clear, I think the one thing Twitter has going for it is for the overwhelming vast majority of people, there is no replacement. While I don't super see the value in the normal way that people engage with Twitter, as I say, I just post my thoughts and read my mentions. For a lot of people, there is no replacement for that. There's nowhere else that they can go. So what's probably going to happen is Twitter won't die unless Elon continues to believe that he's the only person who can make good decisions and refuses to accept that sometimes there are better people than you for the job. Elon will make dumb decisions. It'll have a negative effect. He'll reverse those decisions, and people will just continue to complain and stay on the app because they have no choice. I don't think Twitter's going anywhere, and it's inconceivable to me what Elon Musk could do to kill the platform. Although, to be fair, what he said in that clip, if implemented, would be about as close as you can get to killing the platform. You will never get a situation where there will be enough paid users to cover the costs of all the unpaid users on a social media platform. Social media costs a lot of money to run, and having 1% of your user base paid is not going to cover that cost. And 1% is like charitable. Did you like that rant, chat? I feel like people like my rants and I don't care enough about stuff anymore to rant all that much. It's nice to get somewhat fired up about something, even if it's something is fairly unimportant to me as Twitter. As a final point for that segment, and if you want to read the thoughts that I kind of just explained in that rant, I'm now going to be largely communicating my random thoughts and funny jokes on community posts. Here's the first one, which is the rant that I just explained. I was a funny joke about Rockstar and a carrier pigeon. Look how cute he is. It's great. I do make funny jokes here sometimes. But yeah, I'll mainly be putting my Twitter stuff here now. To be clear, I'm not leaving Twitter. I'll just be posting my content on YouTube rather than there. I should have been doing that a long time ago, and this situation just reminded me of that. So I'll probably just be using Twitter a bit less. True, it is funny that even if you pay for Twitter, Elon reckons he's not going to remove all the ads. You will still get about half the ads. Insane. The man is just broken with reality. The only thing he has going for him is that while Twitter isn't profitable, and the mechanisms to attempt to make Twitter make more money are terrible. As I say, for a lot of people, there is no alternative. If there was competition for Bird app, then he'd be fucked. While there are other Twitter-like websites, their lack of a user base makes them a non-viable alternative. It's very hard to start a social media though. There is only one S-tier social media platform. So Marcus Brownlee wrote on Twitter, hot take, YouTube is still the only S-tier social media platform. I have said this as well. Compared to every other social media, YouTube provides the most for its creators and provides the most value for its viewers while asking for the least. Doesn't mean it's a perfect social media platform, but a lot of what people accuse YouTube of doing wrong is not their fault. And while the platform is still not perfect and has endless issues and problems that arise, a lot of this is just due to how staggeringly large YouTube is. Having, more than 2 billion active users every month, providing a living for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of creators. I probably can't get up to the millions. There's probably millions making some money, but in terms of earning a living, we're still probably in the hundreds of thousands, probably less than a million, but still that's a lot. And when you have that many accounts, that many people uploading, there's always going to be things that go wrong. And when you're YouTube having to navigate all the laws in, hundreds of countries, there's going to be obviously issues that arise. But in general, YouTube is an amazing platform. It is, of course, hard to have that perspective when stuff is going wrong. It's always important to remember that we take note of things that are going badly because they're the things that need to be addressed. We don't sit there of a day and list all the things that are going well. We don't necessarily stop and smell the roses and go, man, YouTube is pretty fucking impressive when you really think about it. And while I'm not going to address them directly, there's a lot of stuff that people talk about in regards to the algorithm and types of content being promoted or whatnot that is just not true, and it's not worth talking about. Am I now just all about the money? So I had someone leave me an interesting comment, chat. All you talk about anymore is your money and success. Shit makes me sad, man. I miss Humble Viper, been a fan since like 2016 to 2017 too. Now it seems every single rambles for the last 50 or so episodes you mention how much money you're spending or success. I get you're proud of yourself, man, but don't let it consume your life, bro. It isn't all about the money. Do other people have that perception? I mean, for those who do, I just talk about things that I find interesting or that are happening in my life in general. And the stuff that I'm generally spending my money on, I hope people usually recognize is more about, improving my well-being, which benefits you as well, because I'm in a better mood and I have more energy to make content. I did have another comment similar to this talking about like, oh yeah, you're bragging about your $24,000 blinds, whatever. I just think it's interesting. It is certainly true. I didn't need to spend that much. I could have just gotten them for like my bedroom, for example, rather than the entire house. But I've been waiting 7 years for blinds and I can afford it. So why not? Me spending money getting as good a bed as I can get and getting blinds and stuff, it's all about fixing the one major problem with my life, and that is my inability to sleep consistently and soundly and to wake up with energy. And if I can solve that, we'll be on easy street, chat. The quality of the content will go up 10,000 fold. I'll have more days where I'll be on top of my game. I feel slower mentally, chat, as I have for the last week or something, and I always do when I'm fixing my sleeping. There's normal things people spend money on. It's normal things that people spend money on, but usually not this much money. Like I bought a 4090. Now you could look at that as me just flexing the dough, but in reality, I would never buy a 4090 if it wasn't for business purposes. It'll make my content look better and make things run smoother and process faster so I can do more. Before it was a business thing, I would always buy like, the 70, like the 1070, the 2070 kind of thing. Or often the 60, because that's usually the best value for your dollar. As far as talking about success a lot, it's because I try and impart upon people information that comes across my table or a way of seeing the world that I think is either true or at the very least productive, like it can help you achieve the goals you have in your life, improve your life. Because as I often say, that was a lot of my aspirations early in life was to benefit other people, to make other people's lives better. And I only know about a select amount of things that I feel confident enough to speak on authoritatively to some degree. Often a lot of that has to do with YouTube, Twitch, the online ecosystem, and to some degree how to succeed in that. And so I will talk about success, at least in this avenue, quite a bit. But yeah, so I don't think a lot of people have this perspective, but I hope not a lot of people do. A new word to feel smart. I learned a word yesterday, chat. Acrimonious. It means angry and bitter. I'm totally gonna use that in a sentence at some point, and people will just be like, what? Who the fuck says acrimonious? Where I heard the word, though, was, I'm watching an anime called, like, The Tales of Tanya the Evil or something. It's an isekai, where a dude has been reincarnated or whatever in another world. The sub-translation of the Japanese used that word, and I was just like, dude, come on. Osaka of Tanya the Evil, yeah, it's very good. This needs to be in GTA 6. I'll be real with you, chat. I had not played many other GTA-like games before I played GTA 5, right? So wasn't that surprising to me in GTA 5 that you couldn't destroy trees? Since starting to play other GTA-like games, all of them have destructible trees. Like, all of them. Even the earlier GTA games have it. You can imagine they were just limited by like hardware limitations because the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 or whatever. Or was it the Xbox One? Whatever. Either way, I hope in GTA 6 they at least have destructible trees. Destructible trees and good service for GTA Online as the only two things that matter, right? I finally got my new bed. A lot of hardship, a lot of annoyances to finally get my bed. Here it is. This is a firm mattress now rather than the soft mattress that it used to be. Yeah, because this is an adjustable bed frame in here. I can use that to lift the head or lift the feet. It's not that useful, except when I get a TV, I'll be able to like, when I have to crane myself with pillows and stuff, I can just lift up my mattress. This thing is like really soft. Once I get my blinds, and now I've got this bed, I will finally be able to sleep well. And every single day I'll wake up with energy. The lights from the street will no longer disrupt my sleep and stuff. Then I'll never have a bad day again. And if that works, then all the cost will have been worth it. My blinds were installed, but the drama never ends. So you might notice that my room is a little bit brighter than normal. Watch as my room goes darker. You might think, given that my blinds have been installed, and you can see that I can press them with the button or whatever, that my blinds were successfully installed and nothing went wrong. But in reality, they didn't order the right thing. Despite in the shop where I ordered them, I was like, I want these ones with the things on the sides. Yeah, they're like, yeah, we get it. We want the trims and it locks in. Yeah, no light at all. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. And we're gonna order them right now for you. When the dude came in, I explained it all to him again in intricate detail, and they ordered the wrong thing. Not only did they order the wrong thing, but the thing I actually want is $6,000 more. So in sum total, for my entire house, with 20 motors and 20 blinds, is $30,000. I'll show you what they forgot to order. Here is a window. You have the pelmet on top. So within here, there is two rolls. One roll there and another one behind it. One is like a kind of sheer curtain that comes down like this, so it's a blind. I can see out and light comes in, but from the outside, you can't see inside. Consider it like, and then there's another one that comes down, so it's perfectly block out. No light gets through here. The thing that so this is all fine. They've installed all this, right? But the thing that they forgot was the things that go on the side. There's meant to be a track here and a track here, so that this last blind perfectly fits in here, so that there's no light that comes from the sides. Without these tracks, light comes out here, here, and here. For these things on the sides, for all the blinds, they want $6,000. I don't think it's a classic upsell. I do legitimately think they failed. They just seem to be a very incompetent company. No one would be willing to present themselves as this incompetent so frequently, especially in ways that has no benefit to them and just causes them inconvenience as well. It's incredible how you said exactly what you wanted and still didn't get what you wanted multiple times to multiple different people, emphasizing specifically in particular aspects, and still. Be sure to like and subscribe. Also leave a comment if you have something on your mind. My feed gives them
The limited edition 12,023 Kurzgesagt. Here in the Kurzgesagt labs, we test very important ideas to see what happens when you blow things up or play with black holes. Many of you suggested that we look into an idea that sounds reasonable. Here in the Kurzgesagt labs, we test very important ideas to see what happens when you blow things up or play with black holes. Many of you suggested that we look into an idea that sounds reasonable. Shooting nuclear waste into space. It's one of those concepts that seems like an easy fix for one of the main problems with nuclear energy. But it turns out this idea is not just bad, but horribly bad, and it gets worse the longer you think about it. Why is that? What is nuclear waste? Nuclear waste is a fuzzy term and comes in categories which vary from country to country. But in general, there are three broad levels. 90% is low-level nuclear waste, tools, gloves, or trash used at a nuclear facility that could be weakly contaminated with some short-lived radioactivity. This stuff is generally safe for normal disposal. 7% is intermediate-level nuclear waste, mostly materials that have been in close proximity to a reactor core long enough to become dangerously radioactive. With proper handling, it's either safely buried or melted down and mixed into glass or concrete and stored deep underground. So 97% of nuclear waste is similar to toxic byproducts from other industries. Not great, not terrible. We can handle it. The remaining 3% is where our problems begin. High-level nuclear waste is very concentrated spent fuel taken out of a reactor core. Formerly uranium, it's now made of various dangerous and often highly radioactive elements. As a bonus, it's also incredibly hot and not easy to handle at all. This is what we want to shoot into space. All in all, around 440 active nuclear reactors create about 11,000 tons of high-level nuclear waste each year. Since 1954, we've accumulated 400,000 tons of dangerous radioactive waste. Most countries are dealing with it by not dealing with it and kicking the can towards the future. Great, so let's launch it into space. According to scientists, space is big, and nobody lives there, so it seems perfect for yeeting away this mess. There are a few tiny problems though. Problem 1, stuff ain't cheap. Even though spaceflight is getting more affordable, it's still extremely expensive. Just to get something into low Earth orbit costs on average about $4,000 per kilogram. Putting that into perspective, it costs about $1,600 to mine, separate and fabricate 1 kilogram of nuclear fuel, so launching waste into space has suddenly made nuclear fuel for reactors way more expensive and greatly increased the cost of the electricity they produce. To launch 1 reactor's worth of nuclear waste would cost at least $100 million per year. To deal with all the 440 operational nuclear power plants' high-level nuclear waste would cost some $44 billion per year for space launch before packaging, transport and security costs are added. Okay, let's pretend we don't care. Currently, we couldn't shoot all the nuclear waste into space even if we wanted to. There just aren't enough rockets. In 2021, we saw a record 135 launches into space. If we repurposed each of those rockets and filled them all with nuclear waste, the total amount that could be lifted into a low Earth orbit, which is the closest orbit above the atmosphere, is nearly 800 tons. We'd need at least 14 times more rockets to handle just today's nuclear waste, let alone get rid of the hundreds of thousands of tons in temporary storage. We would need to create entire new space industries to keep up with the demand for giant, toxic space trash trucks. And it gets worse. Problem 2, space is hard. We only made the calculation for low Earth orbit, where we send most of our rockets and satellites. Littering the space around Earth with thousands of casks of spent nuclear fuel would be a nightmare for space junk management and satellite collision avoidance. Worse still, at this altitude, there's still a little bit of atmosphere causing a tiny bit of drag, so we might have nuclear waste raining down from space within just a few years. Experts would call this a huge problem. Clearly, we have to launch our waste further. If we wanted to send it to, perhaps, the moon, We either need way more rockets or we need to build much bigger ones, making it even more expensive. A single Saturn V, the rocket used by the Apollo program, which cost around $1.5 billion adjusted for inflation per launch, could get about 43.5 tons from the Earth to the Moon. So we'd need about 260 Saturn V rocket launches every year. And of course, using the Moon as target practice for nuclear waste-tipped rockets kind of makes a huge mess. So maybe don't aim for anything. Space is empty. Do we really need a target? Shooting waste in any random direction is, you guessed it, also a bad idea. Orbits are loops, which means they have a tendency to come back to where they started. Put enough in the sky in random directions, and you'll get one back eventually. So we'd want to launch our nuclear waste deep into space, which means we need even bigger rockets that would be even more expensive. Not that we would be completely safe then. Earth might run into these interplanetary caskets at some time in the far future and experience a pretty meteor shower made from radioactive dust. Okay, how about we shoot it into the sun? Ironically, the sun is pretty hard to hit. While the sun has very strong gravity, everything on Earth is moving with respect to the sun, including the rockets that we launch, meaning a rocket would have to cancel out all the orbital motion it has around the sun so it can stop orbiting and fall in. Because of this, it's actually easier to launch a rocket entirely out of the solar system than it is to launch it into the sun. But to do either of these things, we need even bigger rockets, probably the biggest we've ever built. Nothing works. The thing is, it gets even worse. Problem 3, rockets go brrrr. Rocket engineering has taken huge steps since the Apollo era. We've made them relatively safe. We've mostly replaced the toxic explosive cancer fuels of the past decades with much saner mixes of liquid oxygen and hydrogen or kerosene. The newest designs even land themselves so that they can be reused. And yet, out of the 146 launches in 2021, there were 11 failures, which means that a sizable number of our rockets carrying high-level radioactive waste would be exploding on the launch pad, or in the worst case, disassembling at high altitude or crashing from hypersonic speeds. Each failure would be at least equivalent to a mini Chernobyl, but instead of being contained under a slab of concrete, spread throughout the atmosphere. Radioactive particles could make their way to faraway places by riding on the winds. Most would fall into the ocean, but some would land on the inhabited parts of the world. They could cover farmlands and get concentrated into our food or enter our water supply, which is, well, bad. Imagine regular large-scale nuclear disasters happening. People wouldn't be happy. Conclusion and opinion part. Nuclear waste is scary, but the fear of it and horrible ideas like shooting it into space reveals how bad we are at understanding risk, because the largest amounts of radioactive elements like uranium and radon are actually released by coal. Burning millions of tons of coal each year leaves ash as a waste product that includes about 36,000 tons of radioactive materials. Less radioactive than high-level nuclear waste, but there's also a lot more of it, and it's handled way less carefully. Some of this ash is caught by filters, but most is simply pushed back into leaky mines, shoved into piles exposed to the wind, or poured into ponds that regularly spill into rivers and lakes. Living within 1.6 kilometers of an ash pile increases your cancer risk up to 2,000 times over the acceptable limit. And this is on top of other toxic chemicals like heavy metals and, of course, their massive CO2 emissions. And yet, while nuclear energy is flawed and its current form may only be a transitory technology, nuclear power plants are a harder sell than coal. Nuclear waste and the lack of willingness to deal with it are a real issue. It's not insurmountable, though. There are good methods to handle it, like burying it deep underground or reprocessing some of it into new fuel. But however we ultimately deal with this issue, we hope one thing is clear. Shooting nuclear waste into space is one of the worst ideas ever. Researching this crazy thing, conducting all of these important tests, and of course, creating this video took us around 2,000 hours, which is insane for a YouTube video. And we couldn't do it without you. If you like what you just saw, you can continue your science journey with one of our products. They're true pieces of Kurzgesags you can take home and touch. And they're the best way to support this channel, like our limited edition
There are more and more electric-powered ferries in the world, at least for short distances across rivers or small lakes. But one of the big problems with them is that the batteries required are massive and expensive. A ferry not only has to move something the size of a building, but it's got to push the water out of the way too. So you need far more energy than something like an electric car. Electric ferries would be a lot easier to run if you could just, plug them into the mains. So that's what the Randers Fjords ferry in Denmark does. It has 350 metres of hardened, waterproof electrical cable rolled up on a drum. One end is connected to the ferry, the other end is plugged into the electrical grid just there, and as we set off, all the power for the motors will be coming from the shore.
Færgen bliver årligt benyttet af 70.000 turister. Vi sejler i gennemsnit 88 ture på en dag. Vi har en lang forlængerledning op fra vores røde hus, hvor min kontorbygning er, som så er gravet ned til færgen. Det er der, vi kobler færgen til, og så er vi klar til at sejle. Færgen bruger i dag imellem 150 og 200 kW. Jamen, før vi kom på eldrift, der havde vi 2 dieselgeneratorer ombord, som vi så stadigvæk har til nød, hvor vi normalt på diesel brugt 100 liter brændstof. Så det med at lægge over på ren el, det er super, super godt.
The most surprising thing for me is just how quiet this ferry is. There's no diesel motor churning away. And you might be thinking, okay, what if something snags on the cable? Well, this was already a cable-guided ferry even before it was electric. Cable ferries are pretty common around the world in places like this, channels with strong currents or shallow waters. Instead of being pushed by a propeller, the boat pulls itself across by latching onto 2 cables laid across the riverbed. There's not much boat traffic around here, and there are already clear rules for how to navigate around cables like that. Basically, don't pass while the ferry's in motion.
Jamen, vejene, der har vi den udfordring, at når store skibe kommer ind og skal ind til Randers, så bliver vi nødt til at fire kablerne af, så de ligger sig på bunden, og skibene kan passere. Hvis vi ikke firer kablerne af, så sejler de kablerne over, og så kan vi ikke sejle. Alle små både kan godt passere, men større skib, de kan ikke. Det tager 1,5 minut at fire kablerne af, og det samme, når vi skal stramme kablerne op igen. Det er ikke mulighed for, at kablet kan sno sig ind i noget, i det holder konstant træk på kablet.
We're not going to be seeing this on ferries across the English Channel anytime soon. Plug-in boats are obviously going to be limited to a few situations, and the biggest fuel burners are still going to be the massive world-travelling container ships. But this does feel like one more step in the right direction.
Brought to you by Squarespace. 10 years before the Airbus A380 took to the skies, Lockheed Martin had an idea for a colossal, huge, double-decker super transport plane. An insane aircraft designed in 1996 that was bigger than a 747 and carried more passengers than an A380 and would have dominated the skies. And it was so big that they would need help from both Airbus and Boeing to build it. Let's explore this never-built aircraft in Found and Explain's 400,000 subscriber extravaganza. It's the 1990s and airports have a big problem. They are full.
Going every place in the world, all attempting to get there the fastest way and the safest way. That's what aviation is.
Air travel has become so popular thanks to large aircraft like the Boeing 747 and economy class tickets that runway slots were filling up. Airports that had previously given away landing and takeoff pairs to airlines were now selling them at a premium, with some popular airports like Heathrow and JFK selling them for millions. Airlines could no longer grow because there was only so many hours in the day to land at these locations. Thus the solution was bigger planes.
The jumbos are coming.
Boeing had started the trend with the 747 and Airbus was following with the A340 series, and there were rumours that they were both working on something even bigger. Hint hint, A380. Lockheed Martin, who had left the commercial aviation division after its L-1011 trijet design, wanted a piece of the pie and decided to think of the next logical step in aircraft design. This led to the creation of a program called the Large Subsonic Transport, a series of designs of an aircraft that would be the natural evolution of the Boeing 747. This aircraft would solve the problem of limited airport capacity, fill rising demand in places like China, and be the next military aircraft for the US Air Force, who had fleets of transport aircraft approaching retirement age. Working with NASA, they came up with a report that would fulfill all of these requirements. This is what it was. As I'll mention in a moment, Lockheed would need all the support they could get for this project, even recruiting both Airbus and Boeing to build it. But as you can imagine, when they called them up, Boeing and Airbus would have simply been confused. After all, they had never heard of this project because Lockheed didn't have a website. Something that they could have avoided with today's sponsor, Square. The report had a great title: The Future of Very Large Subsonic Transports, and the aircraft designs inside were even better. The team outlined several different concepts that would be the then future of air travel, such as a giant span loader or partnering up with Dornier for a gigantic seaplane, as well as two simple designs with low wings, with two built-in tail engines and a blended wing body. But it's the final design that was the most fleshed out. It had the catchy name of the Lockheed Very Large Subsonic Aeroplane, and this thing was huge. It had a takeoff weight of 1.4 million pounds with 4 powerful engines, and it also had a wingspan of 282 feet with folding wingtips, much like today's Boeing 777X, which brought it down to 211 feet, which was the same as the Boeing 747. Its length was also huge as well, coming in at a staggering 262 feet long, making it one of the longest planes around today. Needless to say, this aircraft would have dominated the airports around the world and required extensive modifications to the runways and gates, much like the A380 would 10 years later. But I'll get to that point in a minute. Let's talk about what it would have been like to fly on board. This gigantic aircraft would have had a capacity to carry around 900 passengers on board, with them split 450 on each level in a 3-class cabin configuration. This aircraft was impressively wide as well, so passengers might have found themselves in a cabin 17 seats across, or 3-4-3-4-3 with 4 aisles. In comparison, today the maximum that aircrafts go across is 10 seats, so it's a wide boy for sure. There are also studies into modular passenger sections that could be swapped out between flights, and inclusions on board such as a spa, restaurants, or maybe even a casino for when it flew over international waters. Lockheed Martin also planned for a cargo version of this aircraft with intermodal containers. Yes, the same containers that are used on trains, boats and trucks loaded onto a subsonic aircraft. The plane would have been able to hold 16 of these containers on the lower deck and still carry 450 passengers on the upper deck, making it perfect for island destinations such as the Caribbean. Now, if this all sounds very heavy, then you might be onto something. In fact, it's the first of many flaws. In the design document, the plane only had a range of 3,200 nautical miles, or around 5,900 kilometers. This is shockingly small compared to the Boeing 747, which had a 7,700 nautical mile range, or the Airbus A380, which today can fly 8,000 nautical miles. The most popular destination route at the time was between London and New York, which had a distance of 3,008 nautical miles. So it would have been possible for this jet but any routes over the Pacific would have had to land in either Alaska or Hawaii, and this would have made it unpopular for Asian airlines or those in the Middle East, as it couldn't fly far enough. And believe me, they needed every airline on board that they could get, especially when you look at their projected sales numbers. You see, Lockheed Martin was optimistic and believed that they would have a market for around 280 to 370 aircraft. For comparison, the Airbus A380 only sold 242 units, 38 less than the minimum number predicted for the Lockheed Martin Very Large Aeroplane. But this was the early 90s, full of montages and pee-wee hockey teams winning the Olympics, so of course they had hope. They planned an optimistic price of these aircraft around 200 to 300 million US dollars, which is about $500 million US today. It's even more optimistic when you realize that airlines at the time made less in profit per year, and Lockheed was planning to sell them multiple of these aircraft. With a market in sight and a solid concept under their arm, the team went forward with the study. So why was it never built? Fascinatingly, for once an aerospace firm showed hubris, and at the end of the study, Lockheed Martin admitted that it had neither the resources nor the know-how to build this plane. They suggested that they would have to partner with Boeing and Airbus simultaneously to bring this aircraft to the market, with a total development cost of 18 billion US dollars. And this isn't very far-fetched because, as you know, in my Airbus Evolution video that I did, I mentioned how Airbus and Boeing were originally working together on the A380 before Airbus went solo. But this wasn't the only flaw with the Super Lockheed plane program. There were also several other disadvantages to the design. The first would be the incredibly noisy takeoff and landing. Even with modern engines, the sheer size of the plane with its 4 engines would be like a rocket taking off, and you know this thing would guzzle fuel, making it incredibly expensive to run. The aircraft would also require all new...
Hello, yes.
new gates to be built and new service vehicles to
I
perform
remember to unmute
turnaround
myself this time,
tasks.
let's go.
It would take a long time to board and even longer to unload all those modular containers. It was so heavy that it would crush most runways when it landed, and if it landed in the sea during an emergency, it would sink almost immediately. Speaking of emergencies, it was apparent that passengers would have a difficult time evacuating. If you're located in one of the middle seats, you're pretty damn far from the nearest exit, and it would very likely not meet FAA evacuation guidelines. And another thing, how high up would the slides need to be to get out? It would rival those at a water park. And believe me, I'm not done with emergencies. The study also need to examine the what-if scenario if two of these planes hit each other on the runway with over 2,000 passengers combined. What a mess. Lastly, its size would also create a considerable air vortex that would delay planes landing or taking off behind it, reducing the number of airport slots and completely negate its original purpose for busy airports. So what was even the point in building it? As the design was so different from a standard aircraft, Lockheed Martin was not entirely sure how it would fly in the sky or how it would handle normal aircraft's day-to-day flight operations, requiring a ton more study, research, and wind tunnel tests. Alas, this proved all to be too much for the company that had only recently moved out of commercial aviation, and the project was shelved, noting at the end of the report that someone would make this aircraft one day. And in retrospect, Lockheed Martin might have been right to bail on this one. Airbus would go ahead to build the A380, and it would never really be that successful beyond initial orders, and when it was cancelled, the world of super large aircraft would come to a close. Today, point-to-point travel with ultra-efficient aircraft are all the rage, and the Lockheed Martin dream has become a vision of a forgotten future. In my personal retrospective opinion, it seems for Lockheed that they were looking in the completely wrong direction, and they should have spent some time building very small, fuel-efficient aircraft like the Airbus A220. But that's just my personal opinion. This video is a remake of my original video that I made 2.5 years ago, and I never dreamed my channel would get this big. I want to thank you, yes you, the person listening right now, and this is actually me being genuine. I'm no longer reading the script that I prepared for this video because I want to say, somehow looking through the screen at your eyes, thank you very much for watching and helping me follow my dreams of making a YouTube channel about planes and other crazy machines. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Guy seems chill.
To the channel. My name is Dean, and today we're at the Spa Valley Railway in Tunbridge Wells. It's Tunbridge Wells West. The sun is out, the sky is blue, there's not a cloud to spoil the view, but it's raining. It's raining in my heart. It's raining in my heart because this steam locomotive can no longer go to work, steaming along, pulling trains for the happy people along this railway. Sadly, it's come to the end of the line. Its boiler ticket has expired, and some of its parts are already being donated to other locos to keep them in steam. It needs to be taken apart, and one of the best tools for this job is the gas axe, the oxyacetylene cutting torch. But are we going to scrap it? Nah, of course not. But it is time for its 10-year overhaul. The first job of the overhaul is to remove the boiler superheater pipes. They are found up in the smoke box, which is on the front of the loco. So let's climb up. We can have a look inside, see what's there. Just looking through, there we are. We can see inside the smoke box. Spark arrestor has already been removed, so we can see all the way to the front bulkhead. So you have 3 large pipes. That's the bottom of the left-hand one, and the bottom of the right-hand one there, just behind the hoover. The thing at the top hanging from the ceiling, that is the petticoat. That's the underneath of the funnel. Sunlight coming in there, upsetting the picture. And what we're looking at the very back, you see the pipes that are running vertically. They're the soup heater pipes. They run through the boiler. That's what we're after. What you'll see in a moment is the exhaust trumpets where the steam comes out from the cylinders. They're at the bottom of the smoke box, directly underneath the petticoat. So the steam blows out of those and straight up the funnel, guided in there by the petticoat, which is above us now. There we go, there's the petticoat. Right, that petticoat is a pretty heavy piece of metal, so that's going to come first before anything else happens. And Matt and Liam, the workshop, agreed to take that out for us. So thanks very much for that, guys. We'll be able to crack on. If you crouch down above the glass pipes and look up, you should be able to see what is up a 75-year-old petticoat. It's the sky! This is Martin. He decided this first on porch duty, and he's already done 2 of the soup heater pipes there. The nuts are undone just to the right. Each one is taking about 7 or 8 minutes, even sometimes 10 minutes, to get hot enough to be able to get these things undone, because they are so tight. They live in a very harsh environment, and the biggest gun we've got is a 1-inch square drive. We don't get that much bigger than that, and that is barely getting these things off. So we have to get these nuts really hot, so they're glowing molten red. Even more molten red than these overalls that he's wearing. You have to be very careful with these, because everything here has to get reused again, so we don't want to damage any of the pipes or even the nuts or the colics that even retain these pipes in, because everything's going to get reused. These actual soup heater pipes are going to be used on 257 Squadron, which is another Battle of Britain class locomotive, which is down at Swanage. Oh, we'll leave Martin to get on with his work, and we'll have a look and see what's behind him. It's not a bad view out there. Have a look at the front of the loco, that's pretty special. We've fast forwarded just a little bit, about 2 to 3 days into the job now. We've already removed 2 rows of these soup heater pipes, and we have another 2 to go. So that's Each row has 8 pipes, so it's 4 rows of 8 pipes, so 32 pipes in total. Sorry for setting your chest hair on fire there, Martin. You have me on a torch, Martin's assisting in his orange suit, and outside the smoke box we have Alan and young Harry, who's going to assist us to get these pipes out. And we are all of the Sellings team of Southern Locomotives Limited. The nut is now up to temperature, so we'll just leap into action and change tools and put the air impact gun on and buzz the nut off.
Are you ready? Yeah. Let's go. Okay.
Good job. Yes, so we're hammering away quite hard at the superheater elements collar of the and pipe together as a pair. Collar takes this bit off. Good, dusty work. Yeah, there's a collar and button. Yeah, there we go. We're about to hear the sound of the hammer change where the pipe actually comes apart from the header.
Yeah.
Got to be careful not to lose anything. So much dust falling from the top. Big bits of crud there. Loosening up some bolts, tap them upwards. And then away we go. Huge flakes of crud falling from the sky. There's close up. Let's pull one of the bolts out. Get a good shape of it. Got the clutch pulling down. There we go. I just got to attaching the rope to be able to start pulling these elements out. There the rope goes through. And goes to Martin. Reposition myself so I put against the front tube plate there so I can just get better and pull that rope and get these elements to start sliding out.
Hold it. Yeah. Actually, you said you'll come back. The rope's gone off. It should be alright. Maybe not. The trouble is with the rope, you're actually pulling it down and it doesn't help. Yeah. So we're just trying to do it without the rope for now.
where Alan, the anchor man, will be pulling the rope. The problem we have is he's pulling the rope, he's actually pulling the super heater elements downwards, which is then jamming them up. The more of these we take out, the higher that angle goes.
Wow.
So we then start taking the rope off as soon as we get these elements moving. That will do the lasso trick in a minute. There we go. Taking the rope off. Harry grabs hold of it. And then we're out. So we then pull the elements out. Try not to scrape them on the front of the loco. They'll just drop down to the first step, and down to the second step. I'll just climb out and give them a hand to carry this away.
You got it.
Proves to be very heavy with 3 of you there. It's a lot easier with 4. Here's another shot as we take another one of the elements out. But we have a bit of a distraction. Harry in particular. Young Harry has seen some young pussycat tramping around. Alan and young Harry then try to rope the cat into giving us a hand, pulling these pipes out. While Alan and young Harry are entertaining the cat, or is it the cat's entertaining Harry and Alan, we're not sure. Myself and Martin are tying the rope around the elements and pulling away, and Alan the anchor man starts carrying them away, assisted by Harry. Martin started to feel a little bit left out on the last element carry away, so he wanted to get involved in this one. Alan and Harry got their chance to work away in that dust hole of a smoke box.
Quick.
Impact
Behind the loco is where we are taking the elements to. We're just placing them on wood. There they are, there's 2 rows of them. The lower one, the 2 lower ones. That's the curved part, that's where we were working. To put the bolts and the nuts and the collets back on so they don't get lost. You can zoom in there, you can have a good look at those. And in the background you see Sir Keith Park, the loco we're working on, with its tender on the back and a guardsman to the right, and a little shunter next to that. So you now know how we remove the superheater elements out of a Battle of Britain class locomotive. All of them are removed there except the two that we can't actually get out because the steam pipes that feed the cylinders actually are in the way. These two outer superheater elements will be removed once the loco gets to Thurston. In the meantime, we'll give you a little tour around here just to show you where we've been working. As you can see, the headers are divided into blocks. You have a supply and a return for each element. The superheated steam from these headers then travel to the steam pipes. There's the right hand one. There's also one on the left, well, two on the left. One of those actually feeds the centre cylinder. These superheater elements sit inside these flues here, which is where gases flow through from the firebox. Right, well, it's now time to climb down and get out of this loco and get cleaned up. That one quite quick last look at them elements there in the manifold, and that's it. The job is now done. Nice clean job, that one. If you'd like to see more videos like this one from the Railway Maniacs Southern Locomotives, then press that like button and also don't forget to subscribe.
Bird 198, one localizer established, stand by.
One exception localizer established.
Bird 198, could you give me a wind check, please?
Pour 4 pour repousser.
French 140 Charlie, bonjour, repoussé, long passe au sud, donc deux appareils pour Bravo 41 et Bravo 42 vont rentrer une fois que vous aurez poussé.
Donc on repousse long face au sud pour libérer les centres pour le French West 40 Charlie. Salut, tu as bien pris? Ground from Flight. Yes sir. Okay, push and start, long push to leave stand Bravo 4 and next one available for 2 aircraft coming in.
Okay, I got it, sir. You need to clear this stand, so it will be long push, sir. Facing will be south.
Long push facing south, that's correct.
Thank you.
3190.
Break off.
How many
time we are here okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, break
Running
it off.
3180, the 350 asteroid just after push, once you see him starting the push, you can take him up Foxtrot Whiskey 2 for your son Bravo 41.
Copy information, William 3180.
Abaya 34 Tango Romeo, you will follow the Welling for your son Bravo 42.
We follow the Welling for San Bravo 42. Merci beaucoup, il y a 34 Tango Romeo.
Flight deck.
Sir.
Are you ready for engine start sequence?
Yes, sir. Clear for starting engine, sir.
Starting engine 1.
Clear for 1, copy.
Welling 3180, we are proceeding to the landing when the stand was free by Air Caribe. What's up?
Run open. Entry. And 2. And 1. All pressure. Light up. Fuel flow EGT.
For over a century, the sinking of the Royal Mail ship Titanic on the night of April 15, 1912, has captured people's imaginations. The circumstances under which the vessel foundered, and the tragic loss of over 1,500 souls out of a complement of 2,200 passengers and crew, has been documented and detailed through books and films, capturing minute after minute as the unsinkable ship slipped beneath the waves. However, the reality is that the sinking of the Titanic was a story decades in the making, a perfect storm of social and economic factors, together with horrible coincidence, that conspired against this pinnacle of man's innovation, but also man's hubris, the sheer dogged belief that nothing so vast could possibly be destroyed. The story of the Titanic begins nearly a century before its maiden voyage, when, in June 1819, the SS Savannah, a steamer sailing ship hybrid, made the first crossing of the Atlantic using a steam engine combined with a paddle wheel. Prior to the Savannah, transatlantic voyages were made by slow, cumbersome sailing vessels, the progress of which was dictated entirely by the prevailing weather conditions, making them extremely unreliable. Unfortunately, while the Savannah provided a means of superior propulsion, allowing the crossing time to be both quicker and more dependable, its somewhat primitive technology meant its feat was not one held in high esteem, and thus the concept of transatlantic steamships was dropped. It wasn't until 1838 that steam-powered transatlantic voyages were revived with the launch of Isambard Kingdom Brunel's SS Great Western, the first purpose-built ocean-going steamer. The vessel commenced work on services between Bristol and New York, and quickly demonstrated the reliability and performance a steam paddle ocean liner had to offer over contemporary sailing vessels. With continued developments throughout the remainder of the 1800s, by the end of the century sail power had essentially given way completely to steamships, and with improved propulsion came increases in size and capacity. To exploit the exponential increase in migrant traffic across the Atlantic in the mid to late 1800s, the White Star Line, a shipping company founded in 1845, shifted its policies from supplying the British colonies of Australia and Canada to the much more profitable transatlantic service between Liverpool and New York. After changing its corporate direction to almost exclusively serve the Liverpool to New York run, the company underwent a sweeping refurbishment of its fleet to replace its earlier sailing vessels in clippers, financed through a loan from the Royal Bank of Liverpool. With this, the line bought 13 new and second-hand ships between 1860 and 1865, but this over-enthusiastic decision, combined with dwindling profits from migrant traffic due to the American Civil War, resulted in the company's bankruptcy in October 1867, owing a debt of £527,000, or $51 million in 2020. In January 1868, British businessman and manager of the rival National Line, Thomas Ismay, purchased the ailing White Star for £1,000 and dedicated the more recognisable White Star brand to the operation of larger vessels on primary passenger services across the Atlantic, while the National Line would handle freight. To complement this change, and with Ismay's backing, the White Star entered into an exclusive agreement with the Harland & Wolff Shipbuilding Company of Belfast, the deal stipulating that Harland & Wolff would build the line's ships at cost, plus a fixed percentage, while not constructing vessels for any of the White Star's rivals. From this came the line's first steamships, the Oceanic, the Atlantic, the Baltic, the Tropic, and the Asiatic, in 1871, vessels that could compete favourably with the Cunard Line's own fleet of steamships, but also presented pioneering accommodation and features to help endear themselves to the gradually re-emerging migrant market. However, in order to ensure that shipping lines maintained attractiveness to both wealthy and poor travellers alike, captains and crews from all companies were to exhibit a minimum degree of prestige in the operation of their vessels. Such prestige was a contributing factor in the first major loss of the renewed White Star Line, the sinking of the SS Atlantic in April 1873. After battling extreme weather for several days, the Atlantic was feared to be running severely short of coal, and the ship's captain, James Agnew Williams, was presented with an unhappy choice. His first option was to divert course and sail to Halifax in Nova Scotia in order to recoal, but this would incur a significant delay. The second option was to continue towards New York, but at the risk of running out of coal, and thus being left adrift in the North Atlantic until another vessel came to tow the liner to the nearest port. In both cases, the outcome of either decision would reflect poorly on his reputation as a captain, being considered a sign of mismanagement on his part, and a potentially career-ending circumstance. Therefore, he chose the lesser of two evils and turned the Atlantic north to Halifax, but through miscalculations and strong winds, the vessel ended up crashing onto rocks 12 miles west of Halifax, resulting in the deaths of 535 people, with only 371 survivors. The loss of the SS Atlantic, however, was not an isolated incident, and there were many instances where the demands of prestige being placed on the captains and crew of ocean liners were fundamental factors as to their loss. Throughout the remainder of the 1800s, the size and speed of ocean liners continued to increase, and the rivalry of shipping companies against each other became more and more desperate, compounded further by the coveted Blue Ribbon, an unofficial award given to the fastest transatlantic crossing of a contemporary passenger liner. In September 1897, the bar was set higher when Norddeutscher Lloyd, a German shipping company, introduced the SS Kaiser Wilhelm de Gosser on their services between Bremerhaven and New York via Southampton, the first ocean liner to sport 4 funnels, thus acquiring the nickname of superliner. While its performance was comparable to rival ocean liners, the visual fortitude of 4 funnels captured the attention of passengers from all social circles, and thus the trend was quickly set to introduce bigger liners with 4 smokestacks. Its success emphasized further when the Kaiser Wilhelm de Gosser took home the Blue Ribbon on the westbound voyage in 1898. While British liners didn't match the German ones for speed, the Cunard and White Star lines invested heavily in vessels that were much larger, thereby earning more profits through higher passenger numbers. Between 1901 and 1906, the White Star Line introduced a quartet of new vessels that were the largest luxury ocean liners on the water, these being known as the Big Four, and christened the Celtic, the Cedric, the Baltic, and the Adriatic. However, while the achievement of the Big Four in terms of physical size was impressive, they were quickly superseded as larger ocean liners were introduced by rival companies such as Cunard, Norddeutscher Lloyd, and the Hamburg America Line. In 1907, the Cunard christened 2 new 4-funnel ocean liners that were both larger and faster than the preceding German designs, the Lusitania and the Mauretania, both ships being the largest passenger vessels afloat, and both winning the Blue Ribbon on their maiden voyages. The launch of the Lusitania and the Mauretania put the White Star Line on the back foot, and they needed to respond quickly. Thus, in late 1907, J. Bruce Ismay, president of the White Star Line and son of former President Thomas Ismay, met with Harland and Wolff director William J. Peary to discuss the creation of 3 new ocean liners which would be the largest and most luxurious ever made, these vessels being christened the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Gigantic, later to be renamed the Britannic. Contrary to popular belief, the Olympic class of vessels weren't built to win the Blue Ribbon for speed, but instead win over passengers through exceptional levels of luxury for first-class travellers, and revolutionary accommodation for migrants that was much more sanitary and comfortable than what had come before. The first 2 Olympic-class vessels, the eponymous RMS Olympic and RMS Titanic, were 882 foot 9 inches long and 92 foot 6 inches wide, while also being 104 feet high from keel to bridge, weighing 46,328 gross registered tons, while displacing 52,310 tons of water. Both vessels had 10 decks, comprised 2,000 steel plates to form the hull, were powered by 2 reciprocating 4-cylinder triple-expansion steam engines and 1 centrally placed low-pressure Parsons turbine, producing a cumulative power output of 50,000 horsepower, and were fitted with 4 funnels, although only the first 3 funnels were operational, the 4th being a non-functioning prop used to ventilate the kitchens. The Olympic class of vessels, despite their incredible size, did present a series of significant flaws, both in terms of their design, but also with regard to wider legislation relating to the safety of passenger liners. As mentioned, the hulls were comprised of 2,000 steel plates that were 6 feet wide and 30 feet long, with a thickness varying between 1 and 1.5 inches. The plate fitting was done in a clinkered, overlapping fashion from the keel to the bilge, fitted using hydraulic machines or hammered in by hand, but the steel plates used became brittle when cold. Inside, the vessels were split up into 16 primary compartments divided by 15 vertical bulkheads that could be sealed using automatic watertight doors, and the design ensured that the liners could potentially remain afloat should between 2 and 4 of these compartments be fully flooded. The use of vertical bulkheads was a design choice that differed from the rival Lusitania and Mauretania, where the bulkheads were longitudinal, running stem to stern, this decision being made on the theory that longitudinal bulkheads increased the possibility of capsizing. Furthermore, the vertical bulkheads didn't climb all the way to the boat deck, the highest only reaching as far as D deck, while others only reached E deck. These bulkheads weren't sealed at the top, and while the Olympic-class liners could theoretically float indefinitely with up to 4 compartments fully flooded, this was entirely dependent on the position of these compartments. For instance, if water was flooding compartments at the front and rear of the ship evenly, or in the centre, the vessel would be low in the water, but could remain on the surface. However, if flooding occurred at either the front or rear of the vessel exclusively, the liner would only be able to survive with 2 compartments fully flooded, beyond which the weight of the water would drag either the prow or the stern of the ship further into the sea, and cause them to overspill into the next compartment, beginning an unstoppable chain reaction that would ultimately doom the ship. The next problem was the Titanic's propulsion, comprising 2 reciprocating engines and 1 steam turbine engine. Conventional reciprocating steam engines had been the backbone of ocean liners for over half a century, but steam turbine engines were a new concept that had been most notably introduced on the Lusitania and the Mauretania. Steam turbine engines, while very powerful, had a tendency to cause uncomfortable vibrations across the ship, while reciprocating engines on their own weren't powerful enough to drive ocean liners the size of the Olympic class. Instead, the power of a steam turbine engine was combined with the comparative comfort of reciprocating engines, a perfect mixture of speed and performance that had been previously proven to work on the SS Laurentic of 1908. The issue was that the steam turbine, which powered the center propeller, could not be reversed, while the reciprocating engines, in order to perform an emergency stop, known as a crash stop maneuver, had to be slowed, put into reverse, and then gradually restarted, a lengthy operation that meant that the Olympic liners would only come to a complete halt after a distance of half a mile and over 3 minutes after the order was given. Another flaw was the ship's gigantic tiller, which, even with a steam-driven steering mechanism, was so large and heavy it would take up to 30 seconds to move from full port to full starboard and vice versa. The most glaring concern regarding the Olympic-class liners, though, was their inability to provide an adequate number of lifeboats for the vessel's complement of 3,547 passengers and crew, a problem caused by both the ship's designers and builders, but also by the outdated regulations of the time. The Olympic liners provided 20 lifeboats, comprised of 14 standard wooden Harland & Wolff lifeboats with a capacity of 65 people each, and 4 Engelhardt collapsible lifeboats with a capacity of 47 people each, providing a cumulative refuge for 1,178 people, only 33% of the ship's total complement. At the time, regulations dictated by the Board of Trade stipulated that British vessels over 10,000 tons need only carry a minimum of 16 davitted lifeboats with a capacity of 550 occupants, or approximately 34 persons per boat, an outdated figure that had not been updated in light of the ever-increasing size of liners. In this, the Olympic-class vessels provided more than what the regulations required, but still not enough to carry every person aboard the vessel. The White Star Line reasoned that providing only the bare minimum was done in order to ensure the boat deck wasn't cluttered with lifeboats, and that in the event of the vessel becoming a total loss, this would likely occur in close proximity to other ships that could come to the liner's aid, and thus lifeboats would only fulfill the role of ferrying people to safety. The RMS Titanic was the second of the Olympic-class ocean liners to be built, the first, the eponymous RMS Olympic, having been laid down in December 1908, launched in October 1910, and commissioned in June 1911. Titanic herself was laid down in March 1909, and launched in May 1911, with fitting out of the ship's interior and superstructure continuing throughout the remainder of the year and into 1912. However, the vessel's proposed commissioning was delayed several times, due primarily to problems afflicting her sister. On September 20th, 1911, the Olympic collided with Royal Navy cruiser HMS Hawke in the Solent, resulting in significant damage to the liner that required 6 weeks of repairs in Belfast. As the White Star Line was facing severe financial punishment from the ensuing legal battle between the shipping line and the Royal Navy, to which the RMS Olympic was found to be at fault, the ship needed to be returned to service at the first opportunity, and therefore its damaged propeller shaft was replaced by one sourced from the RMS Titanic, delaying the fitting out process of the latter. In February 1912, the RMS Olympic once again delayed her sister's commissioning when, on a return voyage from New York, the ship lost a propeller blade and thus needed to be quickly repaired, pulling resources from the Titanic. Originally, the maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic was to take place on March 20th, 1912, but due to the constant delays caused by the Olympic, this was eventually pushed back by 3 weeks to April 10th. This change in date was significant, as the potential for ice fields in the North Atlantic, and the measures taken to avoid them, were drastically altered between the 2 months. If the RMS Titanic had undertaken its maiden voyage in March 1912, the threat of encountering ice would have been greater, and thus the vessel would have routed along a more southerly course to ensure it didn't meet any ice fields. Instead, come April 1912, the consideration was that most of the ice fields along the proposed course of the maiden voyage would have melted, and thus there was a lower chance of the Titanic being faced with any obstructions. As is, the number of icebergs entering the North Atlantic shipping lanes can be highly erratic year on year, and in April 1912, it was estimated that over 300 icebergs crossed south of latitude 48 north, the highest number in 50 years. Most icebergs in the North Atlantic, approximately 85%, are formed in the Ilulissat ice shelf off the west coast of Greenland, and the notably mild winter of 1911-1912 was considered the main reason as to why so many icebergs had broken off the shelf during that year. In this instance, the number of icebergs present in the North Atlantic at the time of the Titanic's maiden voyage was so great that the vessel would have, in any circumstance, certainly encountered or collided with one during its journey. It simply couldn't have been prevented. On April 2nd, 1912, the RMS Titanic set sail for her sea trials in the Irish Sea off Belfast, and by that evening the vessel was declared seaworthy, departing its home port for the final time in order to prepare for its maiden voyage from Southampton. At the helm of the Titanic was Captain Edward Smith, a White Star veteran with 40 years of experience, and thus the line's most prestigious officer. However, while Smith had never faced a serious situation during his 27 years of command, he had recently brought embarrassment to the White Star Line while in charge of the RMS Olympic, being held responsible for the vessel's collision with HMS Hawke after ordering an abrupt turn to starboard that cut off the cruiser and allowed it no room to avoid the liner. As such, come the maiden voyage of the Titanic, there was much Smith had to do in order to repair his damaged reputation, and the perceived humiliation he had brought to the White Star Line meant he was forced to deliver, without question, what the management required of him, especially as the company president, J. Bruce Ismay, was to be aboard the vessel as well. Conversely, the Olympic's collision with HMS Hawke had also brought about the effect of giving the liner and her kin the moniker of unsinkable, as even the reinforced prow of the Hawke, specially designed to ram and sink other vessels, wasn't enough to bring down the White Star's crown jewel. Therefore, as the Titanic boarded at Southampton for its first commercial outing, the general theme for both passengers and crew was that they were to travel on the safest liner afloat. This hubristic view continued once the ship had gotten underway on April 10th, and after making brief stops in Cherbourg in France to pick up continental passengers, and at Queenstown in Ireland, the Titanic aimed its bow full steam ahead into the North Atlantic, spurred on somewhat by Ismay and his determination to bring the vessel into New York a day early. As the journey progressed, the Titanic received near constant messages from other ships in the area regarding ice fields, but neither Smith or Ismay chose to slow the progress of the ship. The belief was that, regardless of size, an iceberg wouldn't be able to compromise the structure of a modern ocean liner, a point made in 1907 when the German liner SS Kronprinz Wilhelm slammed head-on into a large iceberg during a transatlantic crossing, and although it sustained a crumpled prow, it was able to limp safely to port without significant flooding. This mindset carried over to the Titanic, with Captain Smith himself noting on multiple occasions that modern shipbuilding had gone beyond the threat of icebergs. Even in the event of a collision, though, the crew were largely unprepared for such a circumstance, as training exercise, including fire drills and lifeboat drills, had either not taken place or were done in a very cursory manner. Only one formal lifeboat drill had been undertaken by the crew of the Titanic, and that was in Southampton Dock, using 2 boats with 5 crew each, essentially amounting to rowing around the harbour for a few minutes before returning to the ship. Regardless, the situation out on the North Atlantic was far worse than Titanic could have anticipated, with many liners and cargo ships either being blockaded or penned in by vast ice sheets. One such vessel was the SS Californian, a Leyland Line steamship en route from Liverpool to Boston. The Californian, ahead of the Titanic, encountered several large icebergs, and by the evening of April 14th had become surrounded by an ice field that forced the captain, Stanley Lord, to bring the vessel to a halt until morning. After coming to a stop, the Californian sent out several messages regarding the ice field it had encountered, even communicating with the Titanic, but due to the Titanic's on-duty wireless operator, Jack Phillips, being preoccupied with the sending of personal messages from the passengers to the wireless station in Cape Race, Canada, he sternly rebuked the Californian, and the warning of ice ahead was not passed on to the bridge. With this, the Californian's crew turned in for the night, not realizing that the Titanic was only 10 minutes away from its fateful collision with the iceberg, and only 12 miles away from the Californian itself. Aboard the Titanic, as passengers and crew settled in for the evening, the two lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, were stationed in the crow's nest high above the foredeck, with specific orders to keep an eye out for icebergs. The conditions, however, couldn't have been worse, as there was no moon to potentially illuminate the white surface of an iceberg, the sea was calm and glassy, thus resulting in there being no waves to break against the side of an iceberg, and the lookouts themselves had not been issued with binoculars, as these had been inadvertently removed due to a mix-up back in Southampton, although this would have made little difference in their ability to see oncoming bergs. The final blunder occurred once the lookouts had sighted a giant iceberg ahead of them at 23:39 on April 14, 1912. In response to the sighting, First Officer William Murdoch ordered Quartermaster Robert Hitchins to change the ship's course and attempted to undertake a port around, whereby the bow and then the stern are swung around the obstacle through a quick change in course. However, Murdoch also ordered full astern, which meant that forward momentum for the ship was reduced and the attempted port around was impaired, compounded further by the time taken to slow the ship's reciprocating engines and slam them into reverse, as well as to force the tiller from one side to the other. In light of the ship's sheer size, weight, and the length of time taken to either avoid objects or bring it to a stop, the best solution would have been to either apply full power and attempt to steer the ship to full port, which would have avoided the iceberg by several feet, or to allow the ship to ram head-on into the iceberg in the same manner as the SS Kronprinz Wilhelm. While this would have crumpled the prow, and likely killed any passengers or crew situated up front, the overall damage and flooding would have been minimal, and the vessel could easily have stayed afloat long enough to reach New York. Instead, after nearly a century in the making, a catalogue of mistakes and poor timing, including a desperate ocean liner construction frenzy that outgrew obsolete safety requirements, an unusually mild winter that put more icebergs in the North Atlantic than there would normally be for so late in the year, a captain determined to salvage his reputation, and a shipping line president forcing him to put the prestige of his company over the safety of his vessel, and a ship that was far too big and too heavy to outmaneuver the looming threat, culminated in the fatal glancing blow of the RMS Titanic with an iceberg at 23:40 on April 14, 1912. The impact burst open the fragile steel-panelled hull and opened 5 of her watertight compartments to the sea, which, over the course of the next 2 hours, filled and overtopped one another, drawing the vessel further and further into the icy Atlantic. Meanwhile, a lack of lifeboats and the unprepared crew resulted in widespread panic, while Captain Smith, paralyzed with indecision, struggled to comprehend the situation before him. From then on, the RMS Titanic and over 1,500 souls were doomed to founder, and the rest, as they say, is history. Thanks again for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, why not leave a like, and be sure to subscribe for more great content. Thank you very much, take care, and I'll see you next time.
If you're like me, you know that half the fun of LEGO is simply taking things apart and creating your own builds with the bricks. And most of the time, this is a tedious but overall pretty easy task to do. But what happens when LEGO designs a set that uses building techniques that make it seemingly impossible to take apart? Well, that's exactly what happened with the recent LEGO Technic UCS AT-AT set. Now, what was the rare issue in this set, and what did LEGO do about this issue? Let's break it down brick by brick to get to the bottom of this controversy. Be sure to stick around as we will explore the problem, the controversial opinion of some fans, and LEGO's response to this issue. As always, if you enjoy this video, be sure to click like and subscribe and maybe ring that notification bell. It really helps out the channel and lets me continue making these videos for you guys. Alright, let's take a look at this set. The LEGO Technic UCS AT-AT is one of the most recent sets in the LEGO Star Wars Ultimate Collector's series. This absolute beast of a build comes with a staggering 6,750 pieces and 9 minifigures. It also stands at over 2 feet tall, so we're not talking about a small LEGO set here. The coolest thing about this set for me is the fact that unlike some other UCS sets, this AT-AT is actually built to minifigure scale. With ample seating for over 2 dozen stormtroopers, it's easy to imagine the scale of an attack of one of these things. It really puts the attack on Echo Base from Episode 5 into a whole new perspective. Like most other UCS and Star Wars sets, the UCS AT-AT incorporates a large number of Technic pieces. These really help to add to the set's sturdiness and give it some really unique articulation points with the head, knees, and feet all moving independently. This much movement with this kind of stability required the LEGO designers to come up with truly unique and impressive connections, but maybe not the most ideal. You see, not everyone was as happy with every aspect of the build, so what's the issue that got people so riled up? Let's take a look at the instructions. The issue people had came on step 130 during the assembly of the first leg. Some parts of the build look like they're impossible to actually take apart again. It starts with a simple Technic frame. These are amazing and versatile pieces that have made their way into an increasing number of sets since their release back in 2009, and they form the base of many other LEGO sets. Let's take a look at this step, which is part of the walker's legs. It says we're supposed to insert the orange pin into the center hole at the end. Next, we attach the axle connector. So far, so good. The real problem comes with what happens next. Moving to step 131, we're instructed to take a green pin connector and position it in the gap to the left side of the axle connector and then push the axle through it. If this seems weird to you, that's because it is. This assembly can't be taken apart by any normal means. As far as most builders could tell, there's only one way to get this thing back apart, and it's not a conventional technique in the slightest. The green pin connector has a tiny slit that's just large enough for the tip of a knife. It's just barely possible to use a sharp object to move the axle just enough out to get the grip on the end of it. However, it comes at the cost of damaging the piece, which shouldn't need to happen. This is extremely rare to see in officially released LEGO set. But wait, there's more. If we fast forward to step 713, another issue comes up. When attaching the body to the underframe, we're supposed to insert more Technic axles into the holes in the side. They actually can't be removed without putting this massive set on its side and shaking it and just hoping for the best. Well, now with that being addressed, let's discuss the reaction from LEGO fans after this set was discovered to be nearly impossible to take apart. This was one of the largest LEGO Star Wars sets ever, so when the first people started posting the instructions online, many builders were quick to point out this seemingly impossible to disassemble section. The reaction of fans was varied, but before we discuss that, let's talk about Crossout, today's sponsor. Crossout is an intuitive online action game that combines vehicle crafting and fast-paced PvP matches. The reaction of fans was varied, with some showing outright anger as LEGO seemed to go against one of its core principles. I don't think there's a comment that sums up the frustration more than this one from a user on Brickset, in which this comment says, quote, "It's ridiculous that this design ever made it into a production set. So what if 99% of owners will never take it apart? The few that want to shouldn't need a tutorial. The point of LEGO is that you can build something, then take it apart and build something else." Bricky13 on Brickset proclaimed that, quote, "This is unacceptable in my eyes, and I hope that they pull this set from shelves and redesign it." Well, this might seem extreme, but technically it's not unprecedented. Back in 2015, LEGO released their WALL-E set, which was also a very highly anticipated set. While most people loved the look and idea of it, the head was actually prone to falling off and it had a bad joint. As a result, LEGO completely recalled that set and redesigned it before shipping out new batches. However, moving back to this AT-AT, most people actually seem to take a slightly more forgiving tone, like this user, who reasoned that, quote, "Nobody seems to bat an eye that a 7,000 piece model is tricky to put together, so why are we surprised and offended that it isn't straightforward to take apart again?" I think this is actually a pretty good take. These sets are massive and incredibly complicated. Honestly, if I'm spending that amount of time to put this together, I want to know that it won't just fall apart or completely get destroyed if something happens to it. Now, other users took a bit of a different approach, in which this user said, quote, "For the life of me, I'll never understand the uproar about this. Are you people really buying a $800 set to use for the parts?" Of course, I do understand where this user is coming from. While I personally would never disassemble this beauty of a set if I were to purchase it, I do understand those who want to have complete control over the things that they buy, especially at this price and with LEGO's principle of disassembly and creativity, and this kind of goes against it. There were some really funny comments as this event and controversy was kind of unfolding. Some people decided to find humor in the situation, like this user Nuche. Quote, "I wonder how long before adult-focused LEGO sets come with a tube of glue in the box. The Craggle maybe?" What do you think of this situation? Do you agree with any of these comments, or do you have your own take? Leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. Now, of course, how did LEGO respond to this issue? As a company, LEGO understands that they're nothing without their fans. As such, they're always very quick to respond to any potential issues or criticisms, which has really made them have such a great reputation. So when reports and complaints started coming in about this AT-AT set, LEGO actually very quickly released a response explaining the design philosophy, as well as a brief instructional video showing how to disassemble the tricky areas without the need for a knife or the risk of damaging your precious bricks. So what was LEGO's explanation for the design of these tricky builds? Here's the press release issued by LEGO. Quote, "All LEGO sets are designed to be rebuildable, including the LEGO Star Wars AT-AT. This set is a complex build intended for those aged 18 plus and uses Technic pieces to secure elements of the set. Once assembled, these pieces can sometimes be more difficult to take apart, but it is still possible. In the case of the elements that attach the upper body to the lower part of the set, builders should be able to tap the side of the Technic rod until it starts to stick out and then remove it using the LEGO tool which is provided in the set, or aka the brick separator. Alternatively, you can ease the model onto its side and the rods will come out. Regarding the pieces used to construct the legs, once assembled, the Technic rods can be removed by pushing the rod from one end and securing the end of it with your fingernail. Then you push back the cross-axle extender and keep repeating this movement until enough of the end protrudes out to be able to remove it. Okay, well, I mean, that seems like a reasonable take, a bit difficult, but I guess reasonable. Basically, LEGO's thought process was along the lines of what a few users were saying. This is a large and complicated build that was designed for adults, and that means that taking it apart will be just as hard as putting it together. In this case, though, it's actually slightly harder than putting it together, honestly. Either way, it's good to see that LEGO at least acknowledged that the disassembly process was perhaps a bit tricky and unintuitive. These kinds of mistakes can easily slip through into production. In fact, I've got a whole video series about LEGO sets that break the rules. I'll link the playlist to those videos in the description. Do you think that all LEGO sets should be able to be taken apart easily? And if you have this set, have you ever tried taking it apart? Let me know. As a reminder, don't forget to download Crossout on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox using my link to receive a free bonus pack with special parts and unique paint. Build your vehicle and play today. Thanks to Crossout for sponsoring this video.
On the 24th of December 1971, Lanza Flight 508 was flying from Lima to Paquepe, Peru when it encountered a storm and was struck by lightning. The plane broke up and crashed down into the Amazon rainforest in what would turn out to be the deadliest lightning strike in aviation history.
Holy shit. Lightning never crashes planes. What the fuck happened here? They're designed to take it, for obvious reasons.
Of the 92 people on board, only one would survive. Julianne Koepke was born on the 10th of October 1954 in Lima, Peru. She was the daughter of two German natural scientists, Hans Wilhelm Koepke, a biologist, and Maria Koepke, an ornithologist. Both her parents worked at the Museum of Natural History in Lima until 1968, when they decided to pursue their interests in scientific fieldwork in the Amazon jungle, taking their young teenage daughter with them. They established the Panguana Biological Station, a mammal, insect, and fish research center located deep in the Peruvian lowland rainforest. Given the remoteness of the research station, Julianne was homeschooled for several years, until local educational authorities declared that she would have to return to Lima to finish her high school education. By late December 1971, Julianne had finished school. She and her mother were originally due to return to the research station a week before Christmas, but decided to delay plans by a few days so that Julianne could attend her high school graduation ceremony. By the time mother and daughter were ready to fly back to Panguana, the only tickets available were for a Lanza flight, departing at noon on the 24th of December. Lanza, or Líneas Aéreas Nacionales South America, was a commercial Peruvian airline originally founded in 1963, which provided a much-needed connection between Lima and other regions within Peru. Over the years, as the company expanded, international destinations such as Chile, Honduras, and Miami in the United States were added to their roster. The company had a notoriously bad safety record. In 1966, pilot error on Flight 101 from Lima to Cusco caused the plane to crash into a mountainside, killing all 49 passengers. 4 years later, Lanza Flight 502 suffered an engine fire and crashed into a valley, killing 99 people on board and 2 others on the ground. Pilot error and lax engine maintenance procedures were to blame. The public were aware of Lanza's track record, and the airline was regarded by many as a last resort. There was, in fact, a common saying regarding the performance of the airline: Lanza lands on its belly. Despite some reservations, Julianne and her mother booked onto Lanza Flight 508 from Lima to Iquitos. They boarded the Lockheed L-188 Electra turboprop at Jorge Chavez International Airport, and enjoyed a smooth and uneventful takeoff. Mid-flight, with very little warning, the plane encountered a severe thunderstorm and was struck by lightning. Julianne described her experience of what happened next. Then I suddenly see a blinding white light over the right wing. I don't know whether it's a flash of lightning or an explosion. I lose all sense of time. I can't tell whether all this lasts minutes or only a fraction of a second. With a jolt, the tip of the airplane falls steeply downward. I can see the whole aisle to the cockpit, which is below me. People are screaming in panic, shrill cries for help. The roar of the plummeting turbines, which I will hear again and again in my dreams, engulfs me. And then, over everything, clear as glass, I hear my mother saying quite calmly, "Now it's all over." From one moment to the next, people's screams go silent. It's as if the roar of the turbines has been erased. My mother is no longer at my side, and I'm no longer in the airplane. I'm still strapped into my seat, but I'm alone, and I'm falling, slicing through the sky. Julianne fell from a height of about 3 kilometers, or 2 miles. She was still strapped to her seat in a row of 2 other seats, which was spiraling towards the ground. She was conscious for a large part of the fall, but blacked out before landing. When she came to, she found herself lying in the mud, looking up at the jungle canopy. She had a broken collarbone, a ruptured ligament in her knee, and several cuts and bruises, including a deep wound to her upper right arm. Despite her incredible fall, these were her only apparent injuries. Though she had miraculously survived the crash, she was by no means safe. She was now lost in the jungle, a significant distance from civilization. Though she could hear search planes passing overhead, the canopy obscured her from sight. She knew that she would have to move if she wanted to survive. She located a stream and decided to follow it, reasoning that it would likely lead to a river where people might live or fish. And so, for 10 days, Julianne did just this. She walked along the bank, constantly on guard for snakes and other wildlife. Later, she swam in the muddy water. She slept on sandbanks, drank river water, and slowly consumed a single packet of sweets she had found in the wreckage where she landed. At this point, she did not know the fate of the other passengers on board the flight, her mother included. Her concern for her mother was heightened when she encountered 3 human bodies still attached to their seats beside the river, preyed on by vultures. After 10 grueling days, Julianne discovered a boat moored on the riverbank. A path led to a wooden hut with a palm leaf roof. Julianne took refuge in the hut, hoping that the owners of the boat would soon visit. While she waited, she treated the wound on her arm, which was infested with maggots. As a child,
Oh, that's horrible.
she had seen her father treat a similar wound on their pet dog using kerosene. So she returned to the boat on the river, siphoned gasoline from its fuel supply, and applied it to the wound, which successfully drove out many of the maggots. The following day, Julianne awoke to the sound of men returning to the hut, which was a base for local woodcutters. The men were startled by her appearance, but had heard news of the plane crash. When Julianne told them she was a survivor of the Lanza flight, they gave her food and helped patch up her wounds. After resting overnight, Julianne was taken on a 7-hour journey by canoe downstream to a place where she could be airlifted to hospital and finally reunited with her father. All 6 of the plane's crew and 71 passengers died directly in the crash. 15 people survived the disaster, though all but Julianne succumbed to their injuries before being rescued. This included Julianne's mother. Julianne's remarkable survival was thought to be the product of several phenomena. The section of seating to which she'd been belted had spun as it fell, and this helicopter effect had slowed her descent. This, combined with a stormy updraft and the cushioning effect of the jungle canopy, had turned a fatal fall into a survivable one. After that, Julianne's childhood in the jungle had allowed her to stay calm and follow a sensible course of action as she hiked towards safety. An investigation into the crash revealed that the crew had been under some pressure to make up for previous delays during the busy holiday season, something which might have contributed to their decision not to deviate around the storm. Additionally, it was found that the plane had been in extremely poor condition. It was one of Lanza's last remaining aircraft, and was made up of many spare parts salvaged from defunct Lanza planes. In the wake of the disaster, the company's operating license was suspended, and Lanza shut down for good. Julianne recovered from her injuries. Her survival story attracted a great deal of media attention, and many outright false stories were published about her ordeal, including rumours that she had abandoned other survivors, and a fabricated story that she had built a raft in order to escape the jungle. She moved to Germany and went on to study biology at the University of Kiel. When her father passed away 13 years later, she took his place as the director of Panguana and coordinator of its research expeditions. Many years after the disaster, Julianne wrote a book about her experiences, and also revisited the site of the crash as part of a documentary made by Werner Herzog. Julianne is now a doctor, and goes by her married name, Dilla. Dr. Dilla remains a well-known figure, though her miraculous survival of a plane crash and a 10-day hike through the jungle is just one part of her life. Since then, she has gone on to become an eminent zoologist. She flies often, and has devoted a significant part of her life to the preservation of the same jungle environment that almost killed her. With regards to this, she has said, "The jungle caught me and saved me. It was not its fault that I landed there. On the 11th of May 2004, a huge explosion shattered the quiet of a hot spring day in the Maryhill district of Glasgow, Scotland. The blast had taken place on the premises of the Stockline Plastics factory, almost completely destroying the facility's main building and trapping at least a dozen workers. It was a disaster that had come without warning, but one which, an investigation would reveal, could certainly have been avoided. The ICL Plastics factory was a 4-storey facility in Maryhill, Glasgow. The building was occupied by a number of different companies, all of them subsidiaries of the holding company ICL Plastics Limited. Stockline Plastics was one of these subsidiaries, with its main business being the distribution and supply of several different kinds of plastic. Other subsidiaries of ICL Plastics handled other parts of the business, such as marketing or manufacture. Because of its prominence, though, locals generally referred to the factory as the Stockline Plastics factory. The main building was built in the 1860s and was originally used as a textile mill, then later as a paper mill. As its purpose changed over the years, it was expanded and modified. ICL Plastics first occupied the site in 1969 and made a number of significant changes. Gas tanks and pipes were installed to supply gas ovens used in the plastics manufacturing process. The roof was replaced, and throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the company purchased more buildings in the vicinity to expand their operations. In 1973, the yard in front of the building was raised in order to reduce the impact of flooding during rainy weather. Rubble infill and concrete were used to add an extra 1.1 meters or 3.6 feet to the yard, completely burying several gas pipes in the process. By the early 21st century, the building was typically occupied by between 60 and 100 members of staff on a daily basis, everyone from factory workers to company directors. At around midday on the 11th of May 2004, around 60 people were in the building when, without warning, a massive explosion took place. Gary Gentles, a manager at a nearby community centre, later gave this account of the blast. It was surreal. I was standing outside the halls on a nice hot summer's day, and all of a sudden there was a loud bang. I had never heard something so loud in my life. My first thought was a lorry had come off the road. Then I realised it was the plastics factory. I thought it must be a fire. It has to just be a fire. But then a couple of seconds later, everything went silent, and then I realised something serious had happened. The explosion had indeed been extremely serious. It had caused the majority of the Stockline Plastics factory to collapse instantly, with only one corner remaining intact. Passers-by immediately approached the wreckage and helped several workers extricate themselves from the uppermost layers of rubble. A patient transport ambulance that happened to be nearby was the first emergency vehicle to arrive on scene. Although the crew had limited resources to tackle a disaster of this type, they were able to begin triage and start coordinating the rescue operation. In doing so, they significantly expedited the response, potentially saving dozens of lives. Fire crews soon arrived on scene. It became clear that at least a dozen people were trapped under the rubble, and so efforts began to pinpoint their exact location. Thermal imaging equipment, fiber optic cameras, sniffer dogs, and carbon dioxide detectors, which could detect the byproducts of breathing, were used to try and locate the victims. Some of those trapped in the rubble were also able to shout for help or use their mobile phones to help rescuers locate them. On the first day, 7 people were pulled, alive, from the rubble. Around 300 firefighters and paramedics remained on site, supported by many other organisations, including the volunteer group International Rescue Corps, a group with prior experience of supporting rescue and recovery operations in the aftermath of earthquakes. Resources from across the country poured into Glasgow to help with the rescue effort. A sniffer dog team was sent from Lincolnshire, and a Sea King rescue helicopter from North Yorkshire was also made available. As survivors were discovered, they were transported to hospitals across Glasgow. Concerned relatives had begun to gather in the area, and the local Maryhill Community Central Halls were set up as a refuge for them, as well as a place to treat minor injuries on site. Local shops and businesses donated supplies to allow relatives to remain on site. Many families stayed at the community centre for the entire duration of the rescue operation. The search continued through the night and into a second day. It was an arduous process, with several firefighters treated for heat exhaustion after working long hours in hot and humid conditions, and in the presence of plastic fumes. After 4 days of intensive searching, the likelihood of finding any further survivors was considered minimal, and the operation was brought to an end. In total, 7 people had been declared dead at the scene, while a further 2 died from their injuries in hospital. 33 people had been injured, 15 seriously. As the rescue effort wound down, an investigation began. Initial reports suggested that gas ovens inside the factory were the cause of the explosion, while other accounts suggested that there hadn't been an explosion at all, and the building had just collapsed under the weight of heavy machinery stored on the uppermost floor. Neither of these theories, in the end, were correct. Authorities spent the 10 weeks after the explosion gathering evidence for their report. 120 police officers and health and safety executives were tasked with sifting the rubble. 1,000 bags of company paperwork was seized and examined, and over 1,000 witness statements were taken. This investigative process would eventually lead to the prosecution of ICL Plastics at a criminal trial, and a massive public inquiry. The public inquiry was held at the Maryhill Community Central Halls, where the relatives of those injured and killed in the blast had waited for news in the days following the disaster. So many wished to attend this inquiry that the Scottish Courts Service oversaw a complete renovation of the venue to ensure that it could accommodate them. Through these proceedings, the true cause of the blast was revealed. When the yard outside the factory had been razed in 1973, it had buried pipes that delivered liquid petroleum gas, or LPG, to the factory's gas ovens. The sections of piping which remained accessible had undergone routine inspections, but the buried sections had not. Over time, they had deteriorated, until a leak eventually formed, leading to a build-up of gas in a mostly unused basement area of the building. Risk assessments of the site should have considered the danger posed by buried pipes, but they did not. Because the pipes were not visible, and had not been accessible for several decades, it simply did not occur to inspectors to consider their condition, especially when there were numerous visible risks to occupy them. For example, during many visits, inspectors had prioritized ensuring the safety of the LPG storage tanks, forgetting in the process to also consider the pipework that led to and from them. A report on the disaster noted that, for everyone involved, hazards that were out of sight were out of mind. The source of the spark that had ignited the leaked gas was not definitively determined. A cigarette lighter found in the rubble suggested that it might have been caused by a worker lighting a cigarette, but equally the gas could have been ignited by the activation of a non-spark protected light switch. ICL Plastics and another subsidiary company pled guilty to 4 health and safety breaches, and were each fined £200,000. Accepting this judgment, they issued a statement expressing their regret. While others may have played their part in the mistakes that led to the underground pipe being essentially ignored, both companies and the individuals responsible for overseeing the health and safety of the employees do not seek to escape responsibility for their own shortcomings. It has been said before and should be said again that both companies apologise and express deep remorse for those who have been affected by the tragedy. It was recommended by the public inquiry that all sites which used underground metallic pipework be identified and undertake work to replace the pipes. Additionally, it recommended that any industry which made use of liquid petroleum gas undergo extra safety inspections. The accident had been avoidable, and these measures aimed to ensure that it would not be repeated. In 2007, ICL Plastics set up a memorial garden to honour the 9 people that died as a result of the explosion. They were 49-year-old Margaret Brownlee, 32-year-old Annette Doyle, 52-year-old Peter Ferguson, 41-year-old Thomas Macaulay, 60-year-old James Stewart McCall, 27-year-old Tracy McErlane, 45-year-old Kenneth Murray, 31-year-old Timothy Smith, and 34-year-old Anne Trench. The garden sits today just a short distance away from the rebuilt Stockline Plastics factory, a reminder that even hazards which cannot be seen still have the power to kill. On the 11th of September 2002, a diving party in Poganica Bay, Croatia, placed a call to emergency services. A member of their group had entered an underwater cave system and not resurfaced. Police divers attended the scene to search for the missing man. They would eventually locate his body, but when they did so, it would be under circumstances that nobody had even remotely expected. Since the 1960s, tourism had been a growing industry in Croatia. Travellers flocked to the country to take advantage of its beautiful Mediterranean coastline and sun-soaked historic towns and cities. Diving was also a popular pursuit in the waters off the coast, which were clean, relatively warm, and filled with abundant sea life. Poganica Bay had all of these things, and more besides. Beneath the idyllic surface could be found an extensive system of caves, which were known as a challenging explore for experienced divers only. The system was made up of 2 main chambers, called the Shallow Gallery and the Deep Gallery. To access these, divers entered through a small underwater portal, proceeded down a long and narrow chimney, and navigated a labyrinth of narrow, twisting corridors. 2 things made this system particularly dangerous. First, the narrow passageways were filled with very fine silt. Any movement stirred up this silt, reducing visibility to 0 almost instantly. In addition to this, the corridors between Shallow Gallery and Deep Gallery were complex and confusing, making it extremely difficult to find the exit once inside the caves. On the 10th of September 2002, a group of 5 friends sailed out to the location of the caves on the tourist boat Domino, accompanied by 2 dive instructors. They were a party of mixed ability when it came to diving. Some had a lot of experience, and some had none at all. One of the more experienced divers in the group was Miroslav Kuklish. As the others prepared dinner on board the boat, he took a preliminary dive, and noticed the entrance to the cave system. The group had heard that there were caves in the area, but weren't familiar with them. Miroslav came back on board the boat and reported his findings, and over dinner, the group discussed their options. Some wanted to dive down and explore, some did not. Some thought that the portal Miroslav had seen surely led to a cavern, and some thought it was probably just a shallow pit. After dinner, at 9 PM, the captain of the ship took a nap, and 2 pairs of divers entered the water, each consisting of 1 dive instructor and 1 less experienced diver. While they went down to explore the cave, Miroslav took a leisurely dive at a shallow depth. watching proceedings from a distance. The two pairs of divers went down, entered the cave, and descended a short way into the chimney. On realizing just how extensive the system was, however, they immediately returned to the surface, agreeing that they weren't equipped to explore a cave that deep or complex at the present time. They spent a few hours enjoying some night diving, spotting fish and octopuses instead. When they eventually returned to the boat, their friends informed them that Miroslav was nowhere to be found. It was now 10:30 p.m. The group quickly realized that he must have changed his mind without telling anyone, and descended to the portal to join them as they explored, perhaps not realizing that they had given up and retreated to shallower waters. At 10:46 p.m, a dive instructor and one of the more experienced divers re-entered the water to search for Miroslav. With a safety line, they descended into the cave as far as they dared and used flashlights to search, but were unsuccessful. The group knew that if Miroslav was indeed underwater, he would run out of air very soon. They placed a frantic call to the local police force, who told them to stay where they were and that trained police divers would arrive in the morning to search. The group spent a sleepless night anchored in Poganica Bay above the entrance to the cave. When the police divers arrived at just before 8 a.m. the next morning, the group were distressed to see that they had only limited equipment with them. They had to lend the police divers some of their own equipment. 2 police divers descended. 90 minutes later, one emerged, in clear distress and suffering from the symptoms of decompression sickness, after ascending from the caves too rapidly. This diver was rushed to hospital. His colleague never emerged. The following day, another team was sent into the caverns, this time much better equipped and prepared. The bodies of both Miroslav and the police diver were recovered. The police diver, 27-year-old Bernard Magic, was recovered from the shallow gallery at a depth of 24 meters or 78 feet. It appeared that he had let go of his safety line, become lost and disoriented, and tragically run out of oxygen. Miroslav was recovered from the deep gallery at a depth of 54 meters or 177 feet. Surprisingly, he was found with a knife protruding from his chest. It appeared that, far from getting lost and drowning, Miroslav had been murdered. Suspicion fell immediately on Miroslav's friends and fellow divers. They were subjected to polygraph tests, during which 2 members of the group had strong reactions to the words blood and knife, something which, at the time, was considered strong enough evidence to take the group into custody. An investigation began. Miroslav's diving equipment was checked and found to be in good working order, ruling out faulty equipment as a potential cause of death. His diving computer was also tested. It was found to be working perfectly, and it showed no evidence of having been tampered with. The police used the data stored on it to analyse his final dive. It appeared that Miroslav had entered the water and dived straight down to a depth of 50 meters, or 165 feet, meaning that he must have entered deep gallery. Almost immediately after reaching this depth, he had begun his ascent. At this point, they surmised, Miroslav must have been unable to find the exit, and instead ended up in shallow gallery. According to divers familiar with the caves, this was an easy mistake to make. Indeed, the police diver might also have made the same error after letting go of his safety line. After 35 minutes of searching for the exit, it appeared that Miroslav became lost once again in deep gallery. He stopped moving for 5 minutes, perhaps resting or taking advantage of an air bubble at the top of the cave. Then, abruptly, Miroslav lost buoyancy and dropped to the bottom of the gallery. It was determined that it was at this point that Miroslav was stabbed in the chest. The police took this chain of events into consideration and speculated on how their suspects could have committed a murder. Had Miroslav been stabbed on board the boat and then taken down to deep gallery? No. It would have been impossible for his killers to simulate Miroslav's movements for the dive computer and still return to the boat in time without experiencing severe decompression sickness. Perhaps one of the divers who went searching for Miroslav had found him in deep gallery, and then stabbed him with his own knife. This was also not possible. According to the dive computer, Miroslav was already dead by the time his two friends set out to search for him. While the police were initially convinced that Miroslav had been murdered by one of his friends, as the investigation went on, this possibility became less and less likely. There simply wasn't any way, given the timings and the data from the dive computer, that someone else could have killed him. The systematic elimination of possible murder scenarios left only one remaining possibility. Miroslav had taken his own life. This was something that was considered extremely unlikely. Military divers who the police consulted with stated that, regardless of the situation they found themselves in, any diver would do everything they could to survive. But Miroslav had not been a military diver. He had been a chef who dived as a hobby. He had been alone and terrified, facing the prospect of a painful death by drowning. It appeared that, with few other options left to him, Miroslav had decided to use one of the only tools available to him to end his life as quickly and cleanly as he could. Miroslav's friends were released from custody, and no charges were ultimately made against them. They returned home without their friend, their lives forever changed by his strange and sudden loss. Pogonica Bay remains a popular diving spot. Indeed, its reputation as dangerous and even deadly makes it more appealing to some. In 2015, 2 more divers lost their lives while exploring the cave system, again after getting lost between the 2 galleries and running out of air. In the aftermath of these deaths, the caves remain accessible, although a plaque has been installed by the entrance, warning anyone who might consider exploring the caverns beneath just how dangerous they can be.
That is kind of horrifying. I won't lie. I've seen this one before.
On the 8th of October 1952, hundreds of commuters crowded onto a local, London-bound train at Harrow and Wealdstone Station. It was a foggy day, and the railway network was beset by delays. Most of those on board would have been primarily concerned with finding a seat in the overcrowded train, or wondering if they would make it to work on time. None of them knew that they were about to be involved in the worst ever rail disaster in peacetime in Britain. Constructed in 1837, Harrow and Wealdstone Station started out as a relatively small and quiet train station a significant distance outside London. As the city grew, so too did the station. Over several decades it was rebuilt, enlarged, and connected to the underground as well as the overground rail network. By the 1950s, London had grown to the point that Harrow and Wealdstone was a busy rail hub on the outskirts of the city. Very different from the sleepy village railway station it had been when it was first built. Now, Harrow and Wealdstone provided services for both London commuters and for passengers travelling across the country on national rail routes, including the West Coast Main Line. The station connected routes to the north as far as Perth in Scotland. The morning rush hour on the 8th of October 1952 was an unusually busy one. Commuters waiting for the arrival of their train into the city found that one service had been cancelled due to improvement works, creating significant delays. These delays were exacerbated by a descending fog. During the 1950s, early morning fog was a common occurrence. The natural fog of a damp, cold morning was often made worse by air pollution. The Clean Air Act had yet to be introduced, and the output of domestic fires and factory chimneys could turn a light mist into a dense and all-pervading smog. All these things contributed to a particularly busy and stressful morning for commuters and railway personnel alike. Driver R.S. Jones was no doubt braced for a difficult shift as he boarded the southbound Perth to Euston overnight service at Crewe. Though much of the UK rail network had been electrified by this stage, some steam trains were still in operation. This was one of them. Consisting of 11 carriages, it was being pulled by the LMS Coronation class steam train, the City of Glasgow. Jones would be driving the train as it finished its overnight journey to London Euston. Jones was an experienced railway worker. He was respected by his colleagues and had worked the line down to Euston dozens of times before without incident. He had passed medical exams and his sight was perfect. With Jones at the controls, the train made its way towards London. Many passengers on board were just waking up after their overnight journey, although some others had been awake all night, including a group of soldiers who had passed the time singing songs and swapping stories. On approaching Harrow and Wealdstone at 8:17 AM, the train should have been delayed for a few minutes by stop signals outside the station. However, on this occasion the train did not stop, nor even slow down. It rattled through a caution signal, then a danger signal, and then straight into the station. There, finally, the emergency brake was applied, but it was far too late. The incoming Perth train ploughed directly into a delayed local train at platform 4. This train consisted of 9 carriages, and was crammed with more than 800 people at the moment of impact. Passengers occupied every seat and were standing in the aisles and vestibules as well. The crash was devastating. The rear 3 carriages of the local train were crushed, and it was violently shunted forward along the line. The front section of the overnight Perth train rode over the local service before finally coming to rest. Moments later, another train arrived at Harrow and Wealdstone station. This was a 15-carriage Liverpool-bound service being hauled by 2 steam locomotives, the LMS Jubilee class Windward Islands and the Princess Royal class Princess Anne. Expecting its line through the station to be clear, this train was travelling at high speed. Within seconds, it collided with the wreckage strewn across the tracks and violently derailed. The 2 heavy locomotives mounted the platform, ploughing into commuters who had barely had a chance to react to the first collision. So great was the noise of these 2 consecutive crashes that the station clerk picked up the phone to call emergency services without even looking to see what had happened. One survivor, Pelham B. Swan, later gave an account of their experience, having been on board the local train. Suddenly, there was a terrific jolt. The carriage rocked, the windows flew in, and a storm of splinters flew about us. There were 8 more jolts, presumably from the buffeting rear coaches. There was no panic, no hysteria. No one knew what had happened, and we were too stunned to think it out. I flung open the door of the compartment and we tumbled out. The station was in chaos. Telescoped carriages zigzagged across the lines. It was a terrible and heart-rending scene. Even the bridge across the lines was broken. Despite a huge number of fatalities, the situation could have been much worse if it wasn't for the quick response of the emergency services and a passing United States Air Force medical unit. The unit was on scene within the hour and included Lieutenant Abby Sweetwine, who was later referred to as the Angel of Platform 6 by the media. She improvised with the limited materials available as she tended the injured, using lipstick to mark an X on the forehead of those who had been treated, and an M on those who had already been given morphine, to prevent an accidental overdose. Blankets were torn up to make improvised bandages to treat the incredible number of wounded. The fire brigade, police and ambulance services worked to evacuate survivors, close the station and begin a rescue operation. They were supported by a number of organisations, including the Women's Voluntary Service, and volunteers from the general public. 14-year-old Gilbert Powell was one such volunteer. He had been about to board a bus to school outside the station when he heard the crash, and immediately went to assist. His small stature meant that he was able to wriggle into spaces that full-grown firemen could not access in order to check for survivors. Powell spent 4 hours helping the emergency services, using the first aid skills he'd learned with his local Boy Scout troop. Once he had done all he could, the boy then sought out a nurse and asked her to write him a note to excuse his absence from school. A total of 112 people died that morning. Statistics for wounded and traumatized survivors were also high. approximately 340 people received medical treatment, with 157 requiring hospitalization. There were many lucky survivors of the disaster. One man on board the Perth train survived because he left his seat and walked down the train to a bathroom in order to shave. Another escaped death by opting to sit separately from his friends in a less crowded part of the local train. Both momentary decisions that made the difference between life and death. The Ministry of Transport undertook an inquiry, with the findings presented in June 1953. There appeared to be no mechanical signalling faults, or any signs of human error on the part of the signal operator. The report concluded that reduced visibility due to fog, coupled with a misjudgment or failure to pay attention on the part of the Perth train driver, were likely to have contributed to the first impact. The report could not be more specific as, unfortunately, the driver of the Perth train, R.S. Jones, had been killed in the crash. The Ministry's report also highlighted some general observations, such as differences in carriage construction. The death toll in carriages that were of solid steel construction had been much lower than those where the carriage was largely wooden, something which pushed forward a move towards steel rolling stock in the future. Overall, the Ministry of Transport felt human error was the primary cause, and pointed out that safety depends on drivers following signals at all times. It also noted, however, that systems were currently in development that could help prevent similar accidents, including the automatic warning system, a device that when installed on the rails would warn drivers on board passing trains that a caution or danger signal was approaching. Brakes would be applied automatically if the driver did not acknowledge this warning. In terms of fatalities and injuries, the disaster at Harrow and Wealdstone Station in 1952 remains the second deadliest crash in British railway history, only surpassed by the wartime Quintons Hill Railway crash. British Railway's automatic warning system was introduced within a few years of the accident, and by the end of the 1970s the technology was active on almost a third of routes in the UK. For decades, survivors and the local community campaigned for a permanent memorial of the disaster. In 2002, the 50th anniversary of the crash was marked by a ceremony in which local councillors unveiled a stone memorial plaque near the station entrance, where it remains to this day.
got to, I'm sorry.
I'd like to ask John. You haven't complained, so I'm presuming that you've got a hand on it. But yeah, your digestive system.
No, still not being brilliant. Sorry, I thought I had told you.
No, you just haven't complained. That's vociferously, so you have been. Pretty very nice. Of an imperative need to be anywhere at any point of view.
True enough.
Yeah, I haven't been hassling you to go to school by 11 o'clock, I suppose.
Not even that. Try doing that, so oh shit. Oh, thank you.
Don't keep the phone from the speakers, John. Serious.
Yeah, I know.
Don't apologise.
Sorry about that too. Curious to know what that looks like. They're not designed that built to be able to. Oh, it's not a hat. That's not. It's not a happy object. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I never built them to be able to flex like that. I'm stunned that they can. Now let's see what happens if I drive this thing the other way. Going now, just see what happens. This way is good. Actually can't make it change direction. Come on. Come on, train.